Here we go for an episode on the Always Another Game podcast. We are back in 2025 interviewing, and today with me I have Colin Booth. Colin and I have connected through the ice hockey world, but as I've been made aware, Colin is not an ice hockey player. He helps ice hockey players along with other sports, but I'm excited for this episode because when I came across Colin, a lot of what he was doing aligned with how I feel about sport and how I work with clients as well. And I knew there was something to talk about. So Colin, thank you for coming on. How's it going?
Yeah, good. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to it. Yeah,
so Colin has done a lot of work at a place where I work, which is the Ozone. It's an ice hockey training facility. I come across a lot of the stuff on social media and I was like, this makes so much sense. I used to do a little bit in my latter part playing career, like juggling, reaction ball, that type of stuff, because I saw the benefit of that mind-muscle connection. But from social media, it looks like you've taken that to another level.
We still do that as well. You know, there's still a place for that for sure. But yeah, I think, you know, we try and help athletes ultimately perform to their maximum potential. And as you said, ice hockey is not my sport. Like that's, you know, I can't skate. I don't think I've really ever been on the ice. My mum tells me I have, but I don't remember it. So it must have been quite traumatic. But, you know, ultimately I ended up in ice hockey because of the speed of the game. That's the reality of the reason. You know, the speed of the game requires athletes to be able to process information really quickly, to think really quickly, to make fast decisions. You know, sometimes we don't coach that element of sport brilliantly, and I'm sure we'll touch on that later. So yeah, my role into ice hockey specifically was quite organic. It wasn't intended, but you know, it probably takes up 80 to 90% of my work now, I would say.
Yeah. So you come under the title of Athlete Neuro Performance Specialist.
Yeah.
Sounds fascinating, but ultimately you're working with the mind. And as you said there, ice hockey, a lot of sport, but ice hockey is fast paced. It's fast thinking. One thing I love to remind people is that basically half of our day is automated. And one thing, I can't remember who kind of made me think this the other day, but if half my day is automated, half of my life has been automated, which is insane.
Yeah.
Now, if that autopilot is working for us, it's only going to benefit our life. So I can see that crossover already by working and training the mind to react quicker, to make decisions better. So it's only going to really help out. So before we go too much digging into you and what you do, I love the audience to find out a little bit more about you. So who is Colin Booth?
Wow. Okay. So I'm going to try and kind of steer the way I would steer an athlete. So Colin Booth is a dad. Colin Booth is a husband. Colin Booth is a son, a brother. You know, Colin Booth is not a neuro performance coach. That's just what he does. You know, ultimately, I think that we can get very attached to what we do. And then when we don't do it anymore, we struggle for our identity a little bit. So, you know, fundamentally, hopefully I'm a good friend to people. You know, hopefully I'm a good husband, a good dad, a good son. I drink far too much red wine, if we're going to be honest with each other at early doors. I love a Guinness. You know, I lived in France for a year. You know, there's a few levels, but we lived in Bordeaux, and you know, yes, it has everything to do with the wine.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the background. That's the basics, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that. I actually have got down in my notes actually about the old linking yourself to something. So like I am an ice hockey player. I am this. And actually I've got it in here. So it's interesting. You've touched on that nice and early for me. Now, like any minority sport, ice hockey being, you know, one of them in this country, you didn't play it, but you said your boy does. How did that come about? It's not an usual thing to fall on if there is no direct link.
No. So I played field hockey, which I have to call it now because I work in ice hockey, which I absolutely hate because to me it's hockey, but there's a confusion. So yeah. I played hockey, but not on ice. To a pretty good standard. I played kind of, and I was a goalie, and I played rugby, and I tried to steer my kids down those routes, if I'm being honest. So, Ollie, who is he's actually my middle son. My eldest just never really took to sport, and I'm okay with that. Like, I'm not going to force him into things. He played rugby a little bit when he was a kid, but he played rugby because dad played rugby. He didn't play rugby because he wanted to play rugby. He played it because dad played. And, he wanted to go out on the wing and he didn't want to really get involved. And, and it just died off. And that's fine. I'm okay with that. He's at university. He's studying history. He's going down a different path. All good. Ollie is my middle son. Ollie was slightly more sporty, I guess. He played rugby for quite a while. And then I worked with a guy whose son played ice hockey. And one weekend, he was playing at Nottingham, which is our local rink. He played for the Nottingham junior system. And we ended up, I don't remember how it came out, we ended up going to watch. Which in hindsight was a terrible decision, by the way, but we did it anyway. And Ollie was fascinated with Ryan, this lad who was playing in goal. And he sort of said, Dad, I want to be a goalie. And I was like, okay, but there is a slight problem. You can't ice skate. Yeah. And Ollie was just going into year 6 at this point. So he was kind of 10 going on 11. And I don't know what it was like when you started playing. Obviously, I've got no experience of the ice hockey world, but they have to do this like year of almost skating badges and qualifications. So before you can even play, you have to do 6 stages of skating qualifications. Then you have to do 3 kind of learn to play, I think they call it, qualifications, which is a bit more stick and puck type stuff.
Yep.
And then when you've done those 9 badges, you can apply to join a team. So Joe and I, my wife, we were like, well, let's just put him through the skating lessons, because the reality is he's 11 years old. By the time it gets to a year down the line, it'll probably have died off, in all honesty. That was my genuine thought, was that the novelty would have worn off, and he'll, because it's quite an odd concept for a kid to wait a year to play a sport that they really want to play, So anyway, it didn't die off. He did his badges. So he started playing. He started playing at under 13 level, which is really late, actually. Like, when you think about athlete development, and he's now 17. He's 17 and a half, and he plays for the D-side Dragons in the NIHL 1 League, and he plays for the Milton Keynes Lightning in the National League. So with COVID was in the middle of that as well. So I think in sort of 4 to 5 seasons, he's gone from not playing to being in having a professional contract ultimately. So he's come on pretty good. Yeah,
it is fascinating for any sport, let alone ice hockey. Anybody knows, ice hockey, it's a very complex thing to get into with no background. And I wanted you to share that story, because I want people to know it's not too late. I started playing ice hockey at 5. And when I had boys, obviously mine are a lot younger, but when my eldest got to 5, I'm like, why hasn't he found anything yet? Why has he not started anything? This is weird, but then as I kind of looked at it, one of my best friends, he was roller hockey, and he came into ice hockey at 13 and came straight onto the England under 14 team. A little bit different. He had the transfer skills, but he was still able to find that level and ended up playing elite league and stuff also as well. So, it is possible to start later. And obviously your boy there had a passion for it. He had a drive.
Yeah,
but to stick with it for a year.
But I also think in first of all, in credit to Ollie, he's got an incredible work ethic. And I think if you spoke to anybody, whether that be down at Ozone, because obviously they all know him, he is that kid that will work his tail off. Do you know what I mean? He would want to go on every camp. He would be diligent and listening at those camps. He would be very happy to concede a goal in a camp, but practice the skill and the technique rather than just be focused on stopping the puck. He obviously does a lot of work with me, and I think that helps his aptitude to learning and his ability to process new things and information. He reads the game well, considering he hasn't played a lot of games and I think, again, that comes down to the skills he develops away from the ice. He's very lucky, and I think people tell him that a lot, that he has a facility like we have here where, he will come in tonight, for example, before he goes training, and he will just do stuff. and kind of work on bits and bobs. And he's lucky, don't get me wrong, that he's lucky that his dad does that for a living and his dad has that as a facility. But also he could be not coming in here and doing that. He doesn't get forced to. I'm already here. He has to make his way here. So I don't give him too much credit because I like to keep him on his toes. But, his work ethic is incredible, to be fair.
How do you find that, though? Because obviously now you've got into the coaching field, but also at the same time, you're still his dad.
Yeah.
So, I'm involved in grassroots football. I've seen the challenge. I love it, but I've seen the challenge and I've seen a lot of parents that find it extremely difficult. How have you found that balancing the two?
It was tough at the start, for total transparency and honesty, it was tough. I think it's helped that we have a lot of mutual connections from, me working with them as coaches and him working them as coach to athlete. And I think that those people sort of saying to him, you need to listen to your dad, like he knows more about this than anybody, helps, because ultimately sometimes it did get to the point where it's like, Dad, just shut up. I can't take any more about how my neural pathways are firing and what my eyes are doing to my brain. And, just shut up, Dad. So I think that helped. But then we also came to an arrangement quite early. I think when he started to get quite good, when he started going to kind of showcase and playing for England and all those kind of things, we came to this arrangement where I would say to him after games or training, like, who do you want to talk to, dad or coach? And he would kind of go, like, if he'd had a bad game, generally he'd be like, just dad. Like, okay, you tried really hard. I'm proud of you. I think just remember how far you've come. Like, and then sometimes he'd be like, go on then, I do need it. He'd be like, okay, this is what I think. And that kind of works for us. We spend a lot of time in the car together, as we said off camera, like we live in Nottingham. He plays in D-side. That's a 200-mile round trip. He plays at MK. That's a 150-mile round trip. So we spend a lot of time, listening to country music and talking rubbish, basically. And, a lot of the time that's around hockey and, whatever it comes around in that conversation. So, he's my best mate, ultimately. We spend a lot of time together. I'm his biggest fan, but I'm also very, very willing and able to keep him on a straight path because, kids need that. And again, I'm sure we'll talk about that, but kids need discipline. They need structure. They need guidance. We need to understand how their brain develops compared to ours and understand that they don't think the same and they are going through changes in adolescence that makes them think differently to us. They don't have that fully developed frontal cortex. They don't forward plan. They don't rationally think. They don't worry about consequence. Their relationship with risk is very different. And I think once you understand that and once you can kind of tap into that, it's a lot easier to communicate with what everyone else sees as a grumpy 17-year-old at times, and I'm really passionate about that.
Yeah, I think that's so important to know, that last bit there where you're saying about the brain being fully formed. It's so easy to forget as parents, even as coaches, if you don't quite understand that. Well, why are they not doing that? How come they're not registering it? Why do I keep have to saying it again? I'm dealing with I'm dealing with 6-year-olds, 6 and 7-year-olds, and I have to keep reminding myself, the assistant, the parents. I'm like, these kids are 6, they're 7. They will not see the game anywhere near the same that we'll see it. And we have to give them patience and we have to give them a chance to learn and make decisions. And it's hard. Sometimes my athlete head switches on and I'm like, God, I can see all of these things, but it's no good if I see that. They have to learn how to
and how they learn, right? Like if you're working with 6 and 7-year-olds, your core function really as a coach is to develop a love for the game or even a love for any game. Yeah. Like if I'm coaching rugby at 6 or 7, I don't really care if they play rugby. I just want them to play something. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter to me what they play as long as they play something. Because I think that what you get from sport is so valuable, regardless of the level you play. I think the life skills, the relationships that, I can walk into a pub where I played rugby with somebody 20 years ago and there's a look. You've shared something together that nobody else has shared. There's some stories. I was lucky enough to play in an era without mobile phones. So there's some incredible stories that wouldn't have happened today.
Care to share?
But no, absolutely not. My wife might watch it. But, I think sport does incredible things for people. And as children, fundamentally, you know, we can put way too much pressure on early. We can actually, this could be controversial, but we can actually do things that are damaging to kids through sport. And I would say as parents as well, we can do that. You know, we have this thing in the UK where we talk about resilience a lot. And there's a real misconception around resilience, because people say you need to build resilience, but you don't need to build resilience because you're born resilient. It's literally the way we're born. You know, no toddler has ever kind of fallen over when they're trying to walk and gone like, oh, screw this, I'm not bothering. This is too hard for me. You know, we have resilience inbuilt. What happens is that we don't put ourselves in situations to keep it being a skill we rely on, and it starts to not be something that we can access instantly. And, you know, parents play a role in that ultimately. Teachers play a role in that ultimately. And when we take kids out of situations that are tough because we think we're doing the best for them, we lose an opportunity for them to become resilient. You know, and we have to look at it differently, because we say we want to build it, but actually we've got to get better at protecting it.
You can see it. There's a clear passion for what you do here. That's obvious to me. It's obvious ever since we've started speaking. Where did coaching and this passion to help others rather than kind of help yourself perform, where did that change?
So I worked in education for a long time, worked in primary education. So that's my background. That was my kind of studying, as a post-teenage kind of thing. And I guess my early fascination was always very much around how we learn, you know, why we do what we do, in an educational setting first. Then I came out of mainstream education because, you know, teaching's just not what you think it is when you want to be a teacher, really. You know, it's a lot of parental support. It's a lot of dealing with admin. It's a lot of marking papers that don't matter. It's, as I'm sure a lot of teachers will attest to. So I was quite passionate about sport. I was coaching grassroots kind of levels, rugby and hockey. And I had a kind of business idea that I would try and merge both worlds. For anyone who's worked in primary schools, particularly in the kind of early 2010s kind of era, the quality of PE in primary schools was abysmal. You know, teachers teach every subject. If you're not sporty or you don't really enjoy sport, PE became very, well, a lot of the times it didn't happen, if we were honest, because, you know, it was raining, so we'll just stay inside and read more. Or and there was a business opportunity where the government got rid of school sports partnerships, which was their provision to try and help primary PE. I think we changed from Labour to Conservative at that point. And the Conservatives made it a sort of situation where the schools got money to invest in improving their quality of PE individually. So I started a business where we put sports coaches who were trained by me to kind of teach into schools to teach PE. And it's now back then it was quite a new thing. Now there's a gazillion and one companies that do it. Did that for a while, and was then growing my own coaching ability, as we all do. Ended up working in some pretty high level environments, and continually was fascinated with this whole idea of why some people can do one thing and others can't. Rugby, for those that don't know, is predominantly body shape dominated. So, you know, if you're a big guy, you tend to play in the forwards. If you're like really quick at running, you tend to play on the wing. If you're small and yappy and talk too much, you tend to play scrum half. You know, like there's kind of characteristics. Yeah. And I spent a bit of time in New Zealand. My sister lived in New Zealand, and I looked at how rugby was coached in New Zealand, because the All Blacks were and are pretty dominant. And it wasn't coached like that. It was coached in weight categories at the time. I'm not sure if it still is or not, but it was coached in weight categories. And what that kind of meant is that if a kid, no matter how old they were, if they were small, they had to do all the jobs, right? They had to like play in the front row because there was no big kid, because it's age relevant. And they would sort of go, there's it's a scrum, you 8, in you come. So 8 kids would just walk into the scrum, and, you know, 3 would jump in the front row, 2 would go second row. And it was like, this is incredible, because what you're doing is you're coaching the kids all of the skill sets, right? Because we all know that the rapid kid at U10 who then discovers kebabs and, you know, late nights and beers when he gets to 17 suddenly ends up playing in the second row. But he hasn't learned any of those skills. So this is incredible, right? That's why, you know, so I kind of, it fueled this, I guess it was the catalyst to fuel, well, I can't change the world because, you know, I can't go to the RFU or to England hockey or England ice hockey now and say, this is how you should approach coaching. So I thought, well, why not try and be a bit of a one-man crusade and start doing this in a way that I can affect. So I went away and studied a lot, went down an awful lot of rabbit holes, you know, read, went back to college, did all sorts, and was just intellectually curious about how the brain works and how decision-making is formed and how, you know, how we can coach and coach better. And yeah, I guess, you know, probably 10, 12 years later from that, here we are in the world we're in, and people are getting more and more aware of the world that I'm in. I spend a lot of time in North America where it's a lot more accepted than it is here. A lot more, you know, professional teams are using it. But I also think, in fairness, we are changing. You know, there is more being done in the professional sports. You know, football is catching up. You see a lot of stuff now on these behind the scenes type documentaries that give us an insight into those sort of things. You know, if you've watched Drive to Survive, you'll see the drivers neuro priming before they go out with the blaze pods doing their reactions. If you watch kind of the NFL type stuff, you'll see a lot of the stroboscopic glasses on the wide receivers. If you go on these behind the scenes football things, there's one with Madrid where you see Courtois in the gym doing all the reaction light training, the multitasking and the cognitive loading. And so, you know, pro teams are getting it and they're starting to see the thing. Steph Curry is probably the best example in pro sport. You know, Steph Curry is very open about the work he does from a neuro performance perspective. And, you know, that's worked out okay for him, who wasn't a very big player. And, you know, so we're getting there.
100%. And I love the 1% element. I used the example quite a few times on here, which was years ago, the British cycling team, when they had their huge success, they hired a bunch of scientists and they were looking everywhere for the 1%. Is that bolt lighter than that bolt? And is it just as strong? Yeah, right. Put that light bolt on, you know, make that bike a little bit lighter. And it's that 1%, you know, the X's and O's are great. We can't get away from X's and O's. We were talking about this the other day when we were talking about the podcast, and we were saying about how training has evolving, but you can't get away from its foundational stuff. You still have to have your gameplay, your decision making. It can't just be all pieces of equipment. And like I said, blaze pods, great. But at the same time, if there's no person chasing you down, trying to hunt you down, it doesn't fully correlate. It helps. It's a tool, but there has to be all these variables placed together. When you started going down this route, and you were looking at the players and you were asking yourself, how come this player is doing this and this player isn't? What was it that you saw? What did you learn from it? What did you start to implement when you saw these things?
Yeah, I think ultimately the main one is decision making. I think that, you know, you need a skill set ultimately, right? You need to, you know, for somebody to kick a rugby ball or to make a pass off their left hand, that skill set needs to be there. And that skill set needs to be myelated, which means that it needs to be done repeatedly and repetitively for the brain to call on it for its subconscious. So if athletes think consciously and they engage the front part of their brain, the game is too fast for that. So they have to rely on their subconscious. When they start to overthink things, we get this paralysis by analysis type situation where we just freeze and we're like, oh, it's gone. So we have to rely on our subconscious to perform. For our subconscious to perform, we need our mind to be quiet and still. So that's where the mental skills come into it, right? But the brain will only call upon the skills that we have, first and foremost. Okay, so, you know, from an ice hockey perspective, you're not going to go behind the goal and pull off a Michigan if you can't Michigan. Like, if that's not in your repertoire, it doesn't even come into play. You're not going to do it. Whereas people who can do it could do it. But then it's about, well, what mental state allows me to access that? Because if I'm feeling confident, I might pull that out. If I'm feeling anxious and nervous, it's probably not going to come into my subconscious thinking. So the way I kind of try and use that with athletes is, imagine your brain is, and I hate this in a way because it's what everyone does, but imagine your brain is full of filing cabinets, right? Which most young athletes now, what's a filing cabinet? But okay, so it's a computer system with a load of files in, right?
Yeah.
And all the skills you learn are a file. And those skills those files get listed in order of how often they're pulled out. So the more they're pulled out, the more likely you're going to pull them out, because they're myelinated. They are quicker responses, right? But every file, every skill goes into a cabinet, but that cabinet is called kind of confidence. That cabinet is called anxious. That cabinet is called nervous. That cabinet is called, scared. So the emotional cabinets allow me to pull certain things. So that's why the mindset is so important. And what I found was that, players with high confidence or high confidence in their ability would try more things. Athletes that were more confident in their position in the team would try more things. Athletes that believed that what they were doing was part of their role would try more things. But ultimately what we were creating in the sports I was working in was athletes that played into a structure. So we were fundamentally, in layman's terms, creating robots. And those robots were being directed by somebody on the sideline telling them what to do. Pass it inside. When you get it, go quick. How's about when you get it, look up, see what the option is, and then make a decision? Well, that's hard to coach. Well, it is, but that's our job. That's ultimately what our job is. Coaching structure is much easier than coaching creatively, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah, decision making is fascinating. Now, do correct me if I'm wrong, because this is probably just a Google thing. But I believe apparently we make about 40,000 decisions a day, from what clothes to wear, what we eat, stuff that we don't even realize we're doing either. So it's an awful amount. And this is what I do within my coaching, is I try to remove decision making fatigue, unnecessary decision making. The two examples they use quite a lot is Barack Obama and Mark Zuckerberg, that they often wear a very similar outfit all the time. So they don't have to decide what clothes to wear, which then allows them to be more creative later in the day. So it's the same here within sport and within life. It's kind of utilizing the right decisions and saving that space to make better decisions later on. Like you said earlier on about your boy coming home. If he's been making unnecessary decisions throughout his day, he may be mentally exhausted and not want to go and practice with Blaze Pods and stuff like that. And that's actually I'd love you to share, because we're talking about this stuff. But have you got any examples of things that you do with athletes, any type of drills? What is it you kind of do that people can see what you actually work on and how they can implement it as well?
Yeah, so I think, one of the core functions for everybody is focus and concentration, because from an athlete's perspective, focus and concentration allows them to access that subconscious. So when we are in the moment, in the present, we can perform at our optimum. When our focus and concentration starts to drift and we start to, in an athlete term, start to think ahead a little bit about what might happen, what needs to happen, what could happen if, and we go into this kind of what I would refer to as a story thought territory where, if they score next, we're going to be 2-0 down, then we're going to lose, and then we won't win the league, and then I won't get a contract next year. And before then my wife will leave me and I'll be homeless. And before you know it, them scoring next is, this kind of big event. Whereas focus and concentration allows you to stay in the moment on the task at hand. And focus and concentration can be trained, right? And I think what's really important for people to understand, if they take nothing else away from today, is that your brain is always being trained, and it's either being trained by you or by the world around you, but it's always changing and evolving. And athletes have to be very conscious that, is what's happening to my brain a help or a hindrance to the person I need to be on a Saturday or Sunday or whenever it may be? And I'll give you some kind of real term examples of that. So, obviously we have a societal kind of mobile phone issue, right? People spend 5 to 6 hours a day on a mobile phone. Easy. Mobile phones are set up to drain your attention. They're trying to bring you away from what you're doing. That's why we have push notifications, right? There's a reason why the optimum length for an Instagram reel is, I think, 7 seconds at the minute. Because if it hasn't captured your attention by then, you're scrolling on. So if I sit on my phone for 3 hours, forget about what I do or don't train. I'm actually training myself to not be very good at focus and concentration. That's mental. So instead of saying like, well, I want to train focus and concentration to get better, you almost have to train focus and concentration to get back to where you should be. Because society changes the way we do. And so we do a lot of work, especially with younger athletes, around focus and concentration, just education of that kind of thought process. I think you said something really important earlier about blaze pods and sporting context. You can train cognitive perceptual skills independently, right? You can improve reaction time on blaze pods. You can improve visual perception by using blaze pods. But in my opinion, and science is divided on everything, right? But this is my opinion. So for that cognitive perceptual work to transfer into your in-game performance, it has to include sports relevant actions and behaviors. So if I'm working a goalie here, like an ice hockey goalie, for example, you will see a lot of multi-layered cognitive tasks, because that's what goalies have to do. They have to balance on 2 razor blades for all intents and purposes. They have to skate, which is a quite heavily cognitive function. They have to be able to track a puck, and then ultimately they have to be able to try and catch it coming at 100 miles an hour, maybe. That, if you sort of put that down as individual tasks, shouldn't really be possible. Very complex for the brain to do all of that. So if we're training their brain, we have to have those layers of complexity. So you'll see things where they're like catching with one hand, putting lights out with the other hand, keeping a balloon up in the air while they're doing it. Because just throwing and catching, whilst it has a place as a neuroprimer to get their eyes and brains warmed up, isn't going to push that level through. Adding the cognitive elements and doing it all together, suddenly I can't catch, because my brain's now thinking about 3 different things. It's like my internet browser having 3 apps open. They all run a little bit slower. So, and the best analogy I can give you on that is that, you're training ultimately suboptimally, right? That's a very common athlete way. If you run in marathons and you're an elite marathon runner, you'll go and train at high altitude, because it changes the blood circulation. And when you train at lower altitude, it becomes easier. Well, if I put stroboscopic glasses on somebody that takes away their vision by, making them feel like they're at a 90s rave, when their visual system is then fully exposed to all of the information, its processing speed is A, quicker, and B, more efficient. So it's not rocket science, really, when you think about it. And it's those 1% that you said. And, that's where MG1 comes from, marginal gain 1%. That's literally why it's MG1. It is those little bits that get people better.
Yeah. And on the side of social media, phones, attention, we all know we're in a massive attention crisis. Everybody is vying for your attention. How, if we're talking to somebody here, whether we're talking to a parent of an athlete or we're talking to somebody who wants to grow within their business and they keep getting distracted and procrastinated, what advice can you give them through what you know or what you do that could help them bring the attention to the important tasks and stay away? Because it's massive. It's a massive thing. It's such a dopamine hit, getting those notifications or wondering if somebody's sent, asked to work with you or like anything. It's such a pull. How can they work around that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that ultimately there's a skill that sits underneath it, which is discipline. And having the discipline to choose not to go on your phone at certain times, and having the discipline to choose to put your phone away. I don't stand in front of teenagers and tell them to come off social media, to never be on their phone, to go back to an old Nokia brick and things like that. Because when you make things taboo, it actually gets worse, in my opinion. I think that people start to do it behind closed doors, and then you're like, oh, okay, this is a bit weird. But I do think that education is really important, and understanding the impact that it has the other side. Kids use their phones as communication tools. That's what we have to understand. So, not having your phone can end up making you isolated, can end up making you sad, depressed, lonely. But on the coin side of that, using your phone for communication takes away social skills, right? Takes away being able to read people's body language, takes away being able to read facial expressions. We've all done it. We've all read a text and gone, oh God, I didn't realize I'd offended them. And then you speak to them and it's like, oh no, it's just the way I type. I don't use exclamation marks. I don't use.
Yeah.
And also, kids talk a lot in groups now on phones. So that makes one-to-one conversation quite difficult for them, because other people get them out of them holes in the group chats. And it also makes it very easy to unfriend and ostracize people, because you just chuck them out. So all of these kind of attributes and skills that adolescents are developing doesn't necessarily translate to them when you put them into a locker room. How do I, like, someone says something and like my head's going, just chuck them out of the room. And well, I can't, because it's like, how do I have those skills? So we have to educate, and that's the first port of call. You can't tell, you've got to educate. This is how the brains work. This is what's happening. For me, with athletes, it's about developing discipline, because athletes, and you will know this as an athlete, athletes tend to rely on motivation. And motivation is the biggest, I'm not going to swear because I'm not sure what the audience is, but motivation is not something you should be overly worried about. Like, if you get discipline right, motivation will take care of itself. If you wait to be motivated to do something, you'll never do anything. So you have to have the discipline to go, I'm going to make sure that an hour before bed, I don't go on my phone. Okay, because we understand the impact that the phone has on sleep. We understand the need to get into a good place to sleep, as in a good mental place. We know that the brain needs to be able to shut down fully for us to be able to recharge. So that's why we don't want to be eating too close to going to bed, because if the digestive system has to stay active, the brain doesn't fully shut down, the brain doesn't fully recharge. So being disciplined enough to have a pre-bedtime routine is really important. If you don't then have your phone in your room, it allows you to have a post-sleep routine and be able to wake up, get some sun into your eyes, get the serotonin flooding through the body, go and walk outside, get some fresh air into your lungs, have a sort of routine you do in the morning to get active and going. And then kind of almost using the phone like a check-in process. This is what I say to them. Like, I have no issue if you want to have 2 hours on your Xbox, like, because you need to be a kid, you need to wind down, you need to chat to your mates. What I ask you to do is be really conscious about when those 2 hours are. Be disciplined enough to walk away after 2 hours and not kind of go like, oh, but I'm nearing the final boss or whatever they play now, and using the same time to get better. So if you want to do 2 hours on the Xbox, cool, but do 2 hours at something that's useful too. And just trying to find that compromise middle ground. Because I think when people understand the negative effect, especially if they want to be elite athletes, you can start to get the hook, right? And you can start to sort of try and work with them, taking the phone off them, telling them they can't be on Facebook. It's just not going to work, in my opinion.
And I can only imagine the cognitive drills that you put the players through create that discipline. Like, I find when I played or when I coach now, I don't think about anything else. You go into this zone and the noise disappears, which kind of like social media and life creates, right? It's more. But I find when, if we were doing a drill, I was juggling or something like that, I would just be so focused on that would help me for other stuff, so that I can focus away from not just doing those drills as well.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, As you said, I am very passionate. I think that I talk to my athletes a lot about how the brain works. I want them to understand it. I don't just want to tell them. I want to make them make their own decisions in a way, because, like listening to an old guy talk about things is not overly useful. But if you can engage in their kind of, this is how it works, like understand that you're not going to get fully developed up here until you're probably around 25. That's not a 25th birthday thing. It's roughly. So I'm just trying to help you in this adolescent period, because ultimately what you think and believe and do in your adolescent period is really important neurologically, because we know there's windows of brain development that have a huge impact. And if we can get that right, then I don't have to do as much stuff down the line to try and correct what's gone wrong, because that's way harder. Like, if you've got kids, that if you try and teach your kid a second language between the age of 3 and 5, they're going to pick it up really quickly. If I try and learn a second language now at 45, I can do it, but it's a lot harder. And the neuroplasticity of the brain changes, and the brain starts to slowly, as we age, degenerate, right? That's why grandparents do Sudoku. That's why grandparents do crosswords, to try and keep those neural pathways intact. So if we know that the adolescent brain develops in a certain way, let's just try and make sure that they understand that you're putting stuff into there that's really important. Let's make sure that we're not putting limiting beliefs in there, which I know is something you're really passionate about, but these limiting beliefs of what I really think, deep down I can achieve or not achieve, as the case may be, and let's make sure that we're giving ourselves the best chance of maximizing our potential. Let's have a really good relationship with failure while we're children. Let's embrace situations that we feel uncomfortable in, because this resilience thing it's a real bugbear of mine, because it's there. We just don't allow people to fail anymore. We parachute parent a lot, and that's a generalization. I'm not trying to make people feel bad, but we do parachute parent a lot. When times get tough, and you see it in hockey all the time. He made the 16Bs, not the 16As. Well, let's take him to this club because he'll play for their 16As. No, how's about you let him play 16Bs for a year and learn to work his ass off? Learn to show people that I can play at that level. Learn to get a bit of that I'll show you mentality, right? Because we might be digressing a little bit, but I firmly believe that resilience sits in the middle of two things. Resilience sits in the middle of fragility and anti-fragility, right? And I need to think of a better word than anti-fragility, but it's, it'll come to me. But by not executing this resilience, we generate kids and we produce kids that are fragile. And when they're fragile, things break them, so they avoid them. Okay, they have traumatic experiences with things, and they stop trying to look for those experiences. We make them fragile, just like plates. They crack. All resilience is getting through those events. That's all resilience is. It's just, can I get through it? Okay, so I'm not going to get broken by it. I'm just going to get through it and come out the other side. Anti-fragility is, can I grow in those events? Can I get better from those events? Can I actually look for those events knowing that when I come out the other side, I'm going to be better for it? Because life is that. Sport is that. And if I then have an opinion where I can go, well, I can do anything. Oh, this is crappy. Yeah, but I thrive in crappy. This is where I'm good. Like, everyone else is panicking, and I'm just here. Smooth seas never made a good sailor, right? Like, this is about embracing those times and anti-fragile. If you get athletes that are anti-fragile, I would recruit them tomorrow, like, regardless of how good they are at the sport, because teaching the sport is relatively simple. If you've got that mindset where you will just go and do anything and you don't care what people think about you, it's not important. You're happy to make a mistake because you know that the mistake generates the learning. You know that I'm at a limit of my technical ability. So to go past that limit, I've got to fail. But all that does is it then makes me good up here. So my limit goes up and then I do this. But we don't have that. We create athletes that play within their window because they don't want to show people their weaknesses, and then they never develop their weaknesses, and then they never get truly maximizing their potential. So yeah, I have a big bugbear with resilience, and we need to be more anti-fragile, but we need to think of a better word for it.
We do. We'll come up with something. But yeah, we're on the same page in terms of kind of life is sport, sport is life, and that's kind of where you were going there. And you mentioned earlier about me coaching kind of U7 level and about them just playing. But then you've kind of mentioned quite a few times about maximizing potential, and that isn't just turning these lads into Premier League footballers and turning your lads into NHL players. This is about maximizing their potential in life, because resilience will help at high school or secondary school, whatever you call it, college.
Yep.
If you decide to go to university, business world, creating your own business. More people are creating their own business. They're not going into employment. Resilience, discipline, willingness, going against the grain sometimes. And it's very important to know that this can all be formed through these styles of training, because when I started PEP, now anybody that doesn't know what PEP is, it's this thing that's become very popular in ice hockey, it's quite complex. I would have hated it when I played, and I struggled coaching it to start with because I really couldn't get my head around what they were doing. Now, I'm not playing anymore. There was no desire to really kind of learn it to its maximum. But now I do it. I understand it. I get it. And that's what we have to be comfortable with, is doing things outside our comfort zone, which, again, the cognitive training you do will be really challenging for the mind. You won't necessarily sweat awful much or, it be an absolute agony. But those simple brain tasks are extremely difficult, which has a huge return. To build that resilience and willing to do hard things.
Yeah, I mean, I say to athletes all the time, like, you're not going to leave here being good at anything. Because I can just adapt drills, whether that's technology or just the way I do them, to the point where, I'm looking for your breaking point. That's literally what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get you to a point where you can't do it. So if you're good at something and it's a reaction light drill, then I'll make the amount of time you see the light less, and I'll make it quicker till the next set come on. And then if you can do that, I'll make the time you can see the light less, and I'll make it quicker till it comes on. And I'm getting you to a point where you're going to fail, and then you're going to keep going at that task until you get it, because that's what life is. And from a business point of view, how many people don't send the email because they preempt the response they're going to get from it? How many people don't apply for the job because they preempt the response they're going to get from it in their head? I'm not good enough for that, so I won't send it. That's ridiculous. That is absolutely ridiculous. You're playing under a glass ceiling. Your potential lives up here. And everybody's got potential. This is the other thing, right? We look at athletes and we say, oh, he's got potential. What, has he not? And the same with people, right? This guy's come into our business. He's got potential. Well, so this guy's just ready-made to be a data input clerk forever, right? Everyone's got potential. The key thing is some people don't understand that they can maximize it because of self-limiting beliefs. And sometimes people don't give people the opportunity to maximize it because they don't say or do the things that you think they should. But ultimately, if you look at everybody as having potential, if that's your outlook on life, then your job is to go, how do I help them maximize it? How do I help them get a bit better? And that's ultimately what we're trying to do, right? Whether that's working in the corporate world or the sporting world, I am the sum of my parts. If I'm the MD of a company, I'm as good as the people that work for me. And, I've heard horror stories where people don't want people to improve because then they lose them. Stuff like that. It's like, it's the same in the sporting world, I work, you might know him, I don't know sort of your playing background, but I work really closely with Ryan Aldridge at Leeds.
Yep.
And I think Oldie used to play down, I know he played with Fordy down there.
He was my coach. Yeah.
So Ryan Aldridge, for me, is an incredible human being. I love him to death. I would run through walls for him. So he brought me into the Leeds Knights organization 2 and a bit years ago. Because Oldie understood as a leader where his strengths and limitations were. So he looked at my strengths and knew that I could complement his strengths. And he said something to me very early that has stuck with me. And I say it a lot, but he said to me, my ethos is, this is him speaking, my ethos is, if we look after people on the way up, then they might just come and check in on us on the way down. I thought, what a great way to look at things, because, and it's true. People, he gets people to go and play in the National League, to go into the Elite League. And he knows that when they're done in the Elite League and they want to go drip back down to the National, their first port of call is going to be Leeds.
Mm-hmm.
Because he did them right. He looked after them, he treated them well. And I thought, what a great way of looking at life generally. If you help people get up, generally people remember that. We all remember our greatest coach. We all remember our best boss. If that boss then comes knocking when you want a career change, guess what? You're probably going to go, yeah, I'll go and I'll explore that. So yeah, I think he's really good. I don't know how we got there, but
yeah. Well, yeah, I smile because I love Aldi to pieces, and he was the first ever coach to bench me. We had some issues as player coach, and I went partway through the season, went away with GB20s, and I was made captain for that team. And I found this out later in life, but apparently Aldi had spoke to Pete Russell and said, "How did you do it? How did you get him to be captain and listen and buy into you?" And Pete said what he needed to say. When I came back, due to an unfortunate incident off the ice, we had an availability for assistant captain. I came back, Aldi made me assistant captain. And we went off. I think I got young player of the season that year, and the rest was history. So he was, again, hearing what you're saying, it's interesting to know that he is still evolving with that leadership mindset of open to listening, opening to how do I grow, that he hasn't got all the answers. So, again, it's just another story from sport, which is why it's so fascinating that, we can grow at all times in our career.
For sure. 100%.
So, with all these skills and everything and what you're doing within sport, what is your biggest hope with your business, with yourself?
I don't have, which is a bit contradictory to what I tell athletes to do, but I don't really have big 5-year plans and 10-year plans. And I want to keep learning. I'm very intellectually curious. I want to keep developing. I think the world that I'm in leads to that really well, because there's always new research, there's always new techniques and training and things that come in. I made a conscious decision to try and spread my wings outside of ice hockey last year, for a few reasons. One was that, I spend a lot of time in America and working over in America with athletes. And I think coming back to UK ice hockey is quite tough when you've done that, because the sport, you can be bashing your head against a brick wall a lot of the time. So I made a few moves into football and was very lucky to be able to do some work in professional football and build some relationships there. And so, I think what's next is, I want to keep sort of educating people. I want people to understand, certainly parents and adolescents and coaches to an extent. I've got some really supportive clubs and teams that use me and come to me and want me to share information. There's some clubs and teams that aren't like that. If we're brutally honest, if we're being transparent, there's a lot of people who see what I do as gimmicky, I guess, or just, sort of not transferable to on ice or whatever that may be. But I remember being in sport when sports psychology was thought of like that. Like when I played sport, if you spoke to a sports psych, you were literally nuts, and the perception of you was you had an issue, you had a problem, because we didn't understand the benefit it has. And now you look at elite level sport, and if you're not working with a sports psych, people think you're nuts. So that I have to accept, and I do remind myself a lot that is just the way of the world, and that people will either start this or they'll catch up later. And if you catch up later, then you're going to put yourself into a little bit more trouble, right? So, keep learning, keep getting better, keep trying to build relationships, keep having athletes tell people how much they benefit the work, because I think that's the best advertising that you can have, right? Like I can tell you how good it is, but if an athlete does that, then that's great. Or a coach does that, then that's even better. So that's kind of where we're at.
Well, if it helps, after our conversation the other day, when we were coaching Pep last night, we created a drill at the beginning, which I call the 40 chaos drill, where we just put a few Pep pieces in the middle of the ice, 2 players in and out of the equipment, and then kind of off they go on their circuit on the whistle. But this time we included a color cone. We held the color cone up. So as the players were stick handling, they had to look up and shout the color of the cone. Purely to get their head up. We spoke about, looking down at these equipments and it not quite always correlating to gameplay. And it was actually quite interesting how quickly a few of them really picked it up, straight away shouting all the colors, happily going through the kit. So that was just from a small conversation that we implemented that, so thank you to you to just that little tweak in coaching and we implemented.
Well, there you go. And I think, Danny's doing loads of that. Danny's so revolutionary. And again, I don't think we understand what we've got with Danny Myers and Ozone. Like, I don't think that the hockey world is almost ready for Danny in a way. And they will be. I mean, it will be the norm, the way that Danny trains. There's no doubt about that in my mind. And again, another coach who's so open to learning. So, it was a little bit embarrassing the first time I met Danny, because obviously I've since found out, he was captain of the Panthers, UK Hall of Famer. But I live in Nottingham and I had no idea who he was. No idea.
Okay.
So, because as I said, until Ollie played, I'd never been to watch a Panthers game. And, he'd say, he still does it. He says things to me and I'm like, who? He's like, oh my God, like literally played 500,000 games in the Elite League. I'm like, I have no idea who you're talking about. It means nothing to me. But so open to learn. So, even somebody who's played that much ice hockey and has had that much experience still rings me up and he's like, I've got this drill. And if I had a blaze pod, will it do this? And it's like, yeah, do that. It's like, right, well, how can I get it to add this? And it's, I just think that's incredible. Like somebody with that much knowledge and experience still wanting to provide the best opportunity they can for the kids to develop, right? And we don't know how lucky we are to have Danny, for sure.
Yeah, amazing. Colin, it's done exactly what I wanted this episode to do. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your knowledge and everything that you're doing within sport. If athlete, parent, anybody wanted to find you and learn more about what you do, where can they find you?
MG1 Elite Performance, Instagram, Facebook. Don't really do TikTok and Snapchat and all those modern things. I'm trying to hold firm to my age. Or they can just, visit the website, www.mg1elite.com. Always happy to answer questions, always happy to give a little bit of advice, create conversations. I think it's really important moving forward.
And open to any sport, sticking to certain?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I work predominantly with ice hockey players, with footballers, field hockey, rugby, kind of invasion type sports. I think that, that's important for me. I don't want to, I think that element, as I've said before, the sport specific context is important. And I don't know enough about golf, for argument's sake, to really be able to help a golfer. That's not to say that I won't try and learn at some point, but at the minute I kind of know my lane. So if it's an invasion game, and you want to get better at decision making and information processing and all that stuff, then I'm happy to help. Just can't help you putting, unfortunately.
And that's why I ask, because it helps somebody make their decision whether to contact you or not. Again, Colin, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate your time.
Very welcome. Thanks for having me.
And thank you to everybody that has joined in and tuned in today. If you've taken anything away from today, please share the episode with somebody who may need to hear this. Please like any of the episodes we put out, review, all helps us spread the message here. And as I love to remind you all, there is always another game. Take care, everyone.